It's no news that the pioneers traveled across the country to settle in the West, and this roughly 2,000-mile journey was just as tedious as it sounds. Maybe we might not be able to fully understand all they had to go through on the journey despite the many journals out there, but one thing is very clear. Traveling a journey that far with just wagons over 4 to 6 months definitely required that they traveled with a lot of food. That's because all that is to be seen on the trail were deserts, valleys, and many others, which certainly did not include Walmart or other convenience stores where they can easily get supplies. They definitely survived the harsh weather with food and starved to death without food, even if the weather was toasty warm. Now, how did the pioneers get by during that hard time, especially when it concerned what they ate? In today's video, you will find out about the Oregon Trail diet and a little bit more. One thing we know for sure is that they were focused on hopes for a better life, which gave them the encouragement they needed to pull through those hard times. What to know about the Oregon Trail? The Oregon Trail was a 2,000-mile journey that kicked off from Independence, Missouri to Oregon Valley. It is quite a distance and very exhausting too, especially since travelers have to go on foot, horseback, and wagons. The major issue encountered on the trail was food shortage because there was no way to restock once the supplies got exhausted. And as humans, there is always the need to eat enough food that will meet the body's requirements. Although the trail followed rivers, there were also times when water good enough for drinking was not found because the rivers often got dirty and muddy. The journey is usually started at the end of May because any time later than that would lead to an inevitable exposure to the start of winter, which will make it extremely difficult to continue the journey. If you want to fully understand how it was to be on the trail, you can just imagine starting a weight loss journey. It's never easy, but when you think of all the benefits of staying fit, you want to do it anyway. Now, how did the pioneers survive? What did they pack? How did it meet their body's needs? Let's get right into that. Foods eaten on the trail. The Oregon diet might not be the standard diet for a healthy feeding pattern, but the pioneers did feed that way and they survived. While packing, they were mostly focused on how long the food can stay without preservatives, but they still considered a little bit of the benefits that the food could offer. That is, if it is not perishable. What then did they pack? Don't forget, at the time, there was no technological advancement and no way to preserve food, so they had to just use what they could easily preserve. When packing for the journey, certain types of food were considered staples that almost every family packed to survive. Flour would top that list. Almost all the families on the trail packed flour because it could be used to make a variety of foods, and the type of flour often packed is called shorts. It is the cheapest kind of flour, coarse, and contained a lot of fiber and bran. To have a constant supply throughout the period, a family of 4 needed about 600 pounds of it. It is one of the first choices of food when packing because it doesn't spoil so easily. The next is bacon, which was also eaten quite often on the trail, and it is one of the first things every family packed. Every family that was a fan of pork, that is. It didn't just serve the food purpose, but also did just fine as a medicine. It is often packed in its cured form to retain the fat so that it can last longer, but despite that, many of them still got spoiled and had to be discarded on the trail. Each family had to pack about 400 pounds to have enough for the journey. Sugar is another thing that is considered when packing for the trail. Funny but true, each family going on the trail packed about 100 pounds of sugar to have enough supply throughout the journey. They usually preferred to use brown sugar because it is cheaper. It contained molasses, which could make it melt under the hot sun, but they came up with the idea of adding crushed sugar to get it through the journey. Cornmeal was another Oregon Trail staple that many families depended on to keep themselves fed. That's because it can be made cheaply and it doesn't get spoiled so easily. It is quite difficult to eat cornmeal in the same way every time, so they often look for new ways to make it attractive and delicious at the same time, and that was its magic. Coffee was also not left out on the trail, and it was one of the best foods they relied on when they were running out of food. That's because it can be easily preserved and they can take a lot out of it without having to worry about it getting spoiled. The only issue is they have to roast the coffee beans every single time they wanted a cup. At the start of the journey, they usually had it as breakfast, but as the journey progressed and the food supply was getting low, they usually increased the intake of coffee, anything to stay filled and energetic. Rice was also eaten on the trail, not only because it can be easily preserved, but because it is also filling too, and oftentimes they had rice as breakfast. Now, you couldn't just eat flour in its raw form, and thus came about bread. Housewives often went on the trail with Dutch ovens which they can easily use to bake bread and other things they would want to. Since they usually had a lot of flour with them, they usually had bread every day, especially when they were running out of food. Beans is another Oregon Trail staple that was used mainly because it can be prepared easily and pretty fast too. However, many of them don't like eating it because it was flatulent causing. They often had it for breakfast, but as the journey progressed, they usually had it more often because it is one of the foods that doesn't finish quickly. Now, one would normally think the trail could not accommodate fruits and vegetables because they are perishable and would probably spoil after a few days. Trust the pioneers on this one. When you gotta do something, you find a way around it. To have the touch of fruits and vegetables, pioneers packed them dried, and in that form, they could easily last for long without getting damaged. This helped them to have their fruits even though they couldn't savor them fresh. The least loved food item on the trail was hardtack. It is also known as sea biscuit and or pilot bread. Although most people don't like it, it was a lifesaver when they ran out of food. It was made of just water and flour, and since they didn't like it, most people didn't eat it when they had other options, but it was widely consumed when it was the only available option. And lastly, they had meat on the trail. The meat was mostly not packed but hunted. Men often went hunting for buffaloes, which was a source of meat for them. They might not have been successful during every hunt, but when they are, they took time to enjoy every bit of their meat. In some cases, pies were made to have a little change, and they usually traveled with cows that were brought on the journey solely for milk production. So yes, they still had their milk supply, and when they churned it, they got the butter out of it. While it was not the best of diets, pioneers were still able to feed on some healthy foods during the journey, although many of them ran to waste due to the amount of time spent and the harsh weather conditions. Have you ever wondered if these foods could meet the body's demands? Well, it is good to wonder. But then, why eat food when it won't meet the body's needs? I guess we will all agree that there is no reason to. As primitive as the Oregon Trail diet seemed, it was surprisingly enough to meet the body's requirements per time. As earlier discussed, one of the major foods taken on the trail is shorts, which is a type of flour that is high in fiber. Not only is it a great source of protein and complex carbohydrates, it is also low in fat and cholesterol, which is overall considered healthy. Flour, alongside other foods like sugar, coffee, rice, and hardtack, are good for energy, which is well needed for the journey. With these foods, as long as they don't run out of them, travelers can meet their energy needs. Proteins and antioxidants were also very necessary on the journey. You gotta build cells and prevent inflammation, right? They had bacon and other foods like dried beans, buffalo, cornmeal as a part of their diet, and this met their protein, vitamins, and mineral needs. Remember, they also had dried fruits and vegetables too. Funny as it might sound, if the foods packed did not spoil during the journey, most classes of foods were eaten and they could sufficiently meet their needs. The issue started when their food got exhausted or spoiled. Other than that, there wouldn't be any issues whatsoever with food and how they meet their body's needs. The Oregon Trail was no doubt tedious, and that was even worsened by the fact that they could not shop for supplies. All they depended on was the food they could pack before setting out on the journey. Good thing is, previous travelers often released journals and personal notes about food that will be needed and how much of it will be sufficient for the journey. This served as a guide to later travelers, and the food was cautiously packed to cut across all classes of food to meet their body's needs, particularly energy requirements, as long as it didn't spoil too quickly. It is proof that even with the most difficult circumstances, if they really want to, you can still choose to have what is necessary for your body to stay healthy, even if it doesn't match up with luxury. So, when you have that diet plan that doesn't seem attractive, remember to ask yourself if you want to be attractive or healthy. And when you have that answer, you will be able to keep your shoulders high about any diet, just as the pioneers did. What did you find the most surprising about today's video? Share with us in the comments below. And if you enjoyed today's content, check out this video next. Until next time,